I was sitting at the dining table, exhausted from a long business trip, when the scream came. It wasn't just any scream. It was the kind of scream that freezes your blood, the kind that makes your heart stop mid-beat. The maid, a woman who had worked in my home for 3 years and had never raised her voice above a whisper, came running toward me with her hands stretched out, her face twisted in absolute terror. "Don't eat it, sir. Please don't eat it." Her voice echoed through the entire mansion, bouncing off the high ceilings and the glass walls that overlooked the ocean. I had my spoon halfway to my mouth. The steam from the pepper soup was still rising, curling into the air like tiny ghosts. My favorite meal, the one I always asked for after a long trip. And now this woman was screaming at me like I was about to swallow poison. Before you hear the rest of what happened that night, I need you to do something for me. I need you to subscribe to Pressify Stories right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like on this video and comment your country down below before we continue. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end of this one. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Lawrence Foster, and if you're hearing this story, you need to understand something first. The man sitting at that table, the man who almost ate poison, wasn't always a billionaire. He wasn't always the man people bowed to at business meetings, or the man whose name appeared in magazines. That man was once a boy who slept on cold concrete floors and went to bed with his stomach growling so loud it kept him awake. That boy was me, and the journey from that floor to that glass mansion overlooking the ocean is what makes this betrayal cut so much deeper than you can imagine. I was born in a small village outside Houston, Texas, to parents who loved me more than anything in the world. My father was a mechanic who worked on old trucks, and my mother sold vegetables at the local market. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I remember my mother's laugh, the way it filled our tiny house, and my father's rough hands when he lifted me onto his shoulders. I remember feeling safe. I remember feeling loved. But that safety, that love, it didn't last long. My mother passed away when I was 7 years old. She had been sick for months, coughing through the nights, growing thinner and weaker, until one morning she just didn't wake up. My father tried to hold it together, tried to keep working, tried to keep me fed and clothed, but the grief ate him alive from the inside. 2 years later, he followed her. I was 9 years old, and suddenly I was alone in a world that didn't care whether I lived or died. That's when the relatives came, not to comfort me, not to hold me, but to decide what to do with me. I became a burden, a problem to be shuffled around from house to house like an old piece of furniture nobody really wanted, but felt obligated to keep. My father's brother, my Uncle Norman, took me in first. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. But I learned quickly that obligation and love are two very different things. I slept on the floor in the hallway because there was no room for me anywhere else. I ate after everyone else had finished, and most nights there wasn't much left. I wore clothes that were too small, shoes with holes in the soles, and I walked to school every day, knowing that when I got home, nobody would ask me how my day was. Nobody cared. The nights were the worst. I would lie on that cold floor, my stomach aching with hunger, listening to my cousins laughing in their warm beds in the next room. I would pull my thin blanket up to my chin and wonder what I had done to deserve this. I was just a kid. I hadn't asked to be born. I hadn't asked for my parents to pass away. But somehow, I was being punished for it. Uncle Norman's wife would look at me with this expression of disgust, like I was something dirty that had been tracked into her house. She never said it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. She hated having me there. I was a reminder of obligation, of family ties that she wished didn't exist. I remember one winter night when it was particularly cold. The heater in the hallway wasn't working, and I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering. I could hear Uncle Norman and his wife arguing in their bedroom. She was saying they couldn't afford to keep me anymore, that her own children needed things, that I was eating food that should be going to them. Uncle Norman tried to argue, said it was his duty as my father's brother, but his voice got quieter and quieter until I couldn't hear him anymore, and I knew then that my time in that house was coming to an end. When I was 11, Uncle Norman decided he couldn't keep me anymore. He sat me down one morning before school and told me I was going to live with my Aunt Dolores. He said it like he was telling me I'd be going to a better place, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He was getting rid of his burden. I packed my few belongings into a plastic bag, the same bag I had brought with me 2 years earlier. My cousins watched from the doorway, but they didn't say goodbye. They just stared at me like I was a stranger they'd never really known. And maybe I was. Maybe I had always been invisible in that house. Aunt Dolores lived 2 towns over in a house that was even smaller than Uncle Norman's. She had 4 children of her own, and when I arrived, they looked at me with the same mixture of curiosity and resentment that I had come to expect. I was the extra child, the one who didn't belong, the one who took up space and resources that weren't meant for me. Aunt Dolores showed me to my room, which wasn't really a room at all. It was a storage closet that had been cleared out just enough for a thin mat on the floor. There was no window, no light except for what came through the crack under the door. It smelled like mildew and old paint, and when I lay down that first night, I could hear rats scratching in the walls. I stayed with Aunt Dolores for 2 years, and those might have been the worst years of my childhood. At least at Uncle Norman's house, I had been mostly ignored. But at Aunt Dolores's house, I was actively blamed for everything that went wrong. If something broke, it was my fault. If food went missing, I must have stolen it. If her children got in trouble, I must have been a bad influence. I learned to make myself even smaller, even more invisible, but it was never enough. No matter how quiet I was, no matter how hard I tried to help, I was always the problem. The worst part was watching my cousins at Aunt Dolores's house. They had everything I had once had. They had parents who loved them. They had warm beds and full stomachs and new clothes. They complained about things that seemed like luxuries to me, like having to share a bedroom or not getting the toy they wanted for Christmas. And I would lie on my mat in that dark storage closet, listening to them laugh and play, and I would wonder what it would feel like to be wanted again, to be part of a family, to matter to someone. School was no better. The kids could smell the poverty on me, the desperation, the loneliness. They made fun of my clothes, which were always too small or too worn. They made fun of the fact that I never had lunch money, that I would sit alone in the cafeteria with nothing to eat. Some days, a kind teacher would slip me an apple or a sandwich when no one was looking, but most days, I just went hungry. The other kids called me names: orphan, charity case, nobody. And maybe they were right. Maybe that's all I was. I fought back sometimes, not because I was brave, but because I got tired of being pushed around. There was a boy named Leon who liked to trip me in the hallways, who would knock my books out of my hands and laugh when I had to pick them up. One day, I snapped. I turned around and punched him as hard as I could. We both got suspended, but it was worth it to see the shock on his face, to know that I wasn't completely powerless. But fighting didn't solve anything. It just made me more of a target. The teachers started watching me more closely, like I was a troublemaker, and the other kids stayed away from me even more than before. By the time I was 13, I had been passed to another relative. This time it was Uncle Cecil, a man I barely knew. He lived in a rougher part of Houston, in a neighborhood where the houses had bars on the windows, and you heard sirens at all hours of the night. Uncle Cecil was different from Uncle Norman. He wasn't passive or indifferent. He was actively mean. He drank too much, and when he drank, he got angry. He would yell about how I was worthless, how I was never going to amount to anything, how I should be grateful he was kind enough to let me sleep on his couch. That couch became my world. It was old and smelled like cigarettes and beer, with springs that dug into my back no matter how I positioned myself. But it was mine, in a way. It was the only space in that house that belonged to me. Uncle Cecil worked nights at a warehouse, so during the day the house was mine. I would do my homework at the kitchen table, trying to focus while the TV blared in the background. I taught myself to cook simple meals because Uncle Cecil never left me any food. I learned to be invisible during the hours when he was home, to stay out of his way, to not give him any reason to notice me. But no matter how careful I was, Uncle Cecil always found something to be angry about. The dishes weren't clean enough. I had used too much hot water. I was breathing too loud. It didn't matter what I did or didn't do. He needed someone to take his frustrations out on, and I was convenient. He never hit me, but his words cut deep. He told me I was a burden, a mistake, that my parents would be ashamed of what I had become. And even though I knew he was wrong, even though I knew he was just a bitter drunk taking his anger out on a kid, his words still hurt. They burrowed into my brain and made me wonder if maybe he was right. I was 14 when I started to realize that if I didn't do something, I was going to be stuck in this cycle forever. I would be passed from relative to relative, used and discarded, until eventually there was no one left who would take me in. And then what? I would end up on the streets or in the system, just another statistic, another kid who didn't make it. The thought terrified me, but it also lit a fire inside me. I didn't want to be that kid. I didn't want to be the one everyone had predicted would fail. I wanted to prove them all wrong, so I started planning. I saved every penny I could find. I picked up odd jobs after school, mowing lawns for neighbors, carrying groceries for elderly people at the store, washing cars in parking lots. I would hide the money in an old shoebox that I kept under the couch cushions, counting it every night, watching it grow slowly, so slowly. $5 here, $10 there. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was hope in tangible form. I also started focusing on my grades. I had always been a decent student, but now I became obsessive about it. I knew that education was my only way out, my only chance at a better life. I stayed after school to use the library, reading everything I could get my hands on. I asked teachers for extra credit assignments. I studied by the dim light of a lamp late into the night, long after Uncle Cecil had passed out drunk on his recliner. My grades improved dramatically. By the time I was 15, I was at the top of my class. The teachers started noticing me in a different way, not as a troublemaker or a charity case, but as a student with potential. But good grades weren't enough to keep me safe at Uncle Cecil's house. The environment there was toxic, suffocating. I would lie on that couch at night, listening to Uncle Cecil snore in the next room, and I would plan my escape. I would visualize it in my mind, every detail. The day I would leave, the bus I would take, the new life I would start. I didn't know exactly how I would survive, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I was drowning, and if I didn't swim for the surface soon, I was going to go under for good. By the time I was 60, I had bounced between 4 different relatives, and I had been with Uncle Cecil for almost 3 years. 3 years of walking on eggshells, 3 years of verbal attacks, 3 years of feeling like I was less than human. And one night, sitting on that couch, staring at the peeling wallpaper and listening to the sirens outside, something inside me snapped. Or maybe it didn't snap. Maybe it crystallized. Maybe all the pain and the anger and the fear finally solidified into something hard and unbreakable. Determination. I was 16 years old, and I made a decision. I was going to leave. I was going to take the money I had saved, and I was going to get as far away from these people as I could. I didn't know what would happen to me. I didn't know if I would make it. but I knew that anything was better than staying in that house, in that life, for one more day. So I waited. I waited until I had enough money. I waited until I had a plan, and I kept studying, kept working, kept preparing for the day when I would finally be free. When I turned 17, I had saved almost $300. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. I picked a night when Uncle Cecil was particularly drunk, when I knew he would pass out early and sleep through anything. I packed my belongings into that same plastic bag I had been carrying for years. I took the shoebox full of money from under the couch cushion, and then I walked out the front door without looking back. The night air hit my face like a slap, cold and sharp, but I didn't care. I walked to the bus station with my heart pounding in my chest, terrified that someone would stop me, that Uncle Cecil would somehow wake up and come after me. But the streets were empty, except for a few cars passing by. Nobody noticed a skinny 17-year-old kid walking alone with a plastic bag. Nobody cared, and in that moment, that anonymity felt like freedom. I bought a ticket to downtown Houston with trembling hands, counting out the bills carefully, making sure I had enough left over for food and whatever came next. The bus driver barely glanced at me as I climbed aboard. I took a seat in the back and watched through the window as Uncle Cecil's neighborhood disappeared. I watched the houses get smaller in the distance, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life for myself. Downtown Houston was a different world. It was late when I arrived, almost midnight, and the city was still awake. Lights everywhere, people walking the streets, cars honking, music coming from bars and clubs. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. I had nowhere to go, no plan beyond getting away, so I found a park and sat on a bench. I pulled my jacket tight around me and tried to sleep, but every sound made me jump. I was afraid someone would rob me, afraid the police would find me and send me back, afraid I had made a terrible mistake. But when the sun came up the next morning, and I was still there, still free, still alive, I felt that determination harden even more. I had made it through my first night alone. I could make it through the next one, and the one after that. I just had to keep moving forward. I spent the first few days wandering the city, looking for work. I went into every business I passed, asking if they needed help. Most places turned me away immediately. A few managers were nicer about it, telling me they didn't have any positions available but wishing me luck. But nobody would hire a 17-year-old kid with no experience and no references. On the third day, I found a car wash on the edge of downtown. It was a small operation, the kind of place where guys stood in a parking lot with hoses and buckets, washing cars by hand. I watched them for a while, studying the way they worked, the efficiency of their movements, and then I walked up to the man who seemed to be in charge. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and kind eyes. His name tag said, Willis Brooks. "Excuse me, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you hiring?" Willis looked me up and down, taking in my worn clothes and my desperate expression. "How old are you?" he asked. 17, I said. "But I'm a hard worker. I'll do anything. I just need a chance." He was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me no, like everyone else had. But then he nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll give you a trial run. You work today, and if you do a good job, you can come back tomorrow. Deal?" I nodded so hard I probably looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. This was my chance. I worked harder that day than I had ever worked in my life. My hands turned red and raw from scrubbing. My back ached from bending over. The sun beat down on me until I thought I might pass out, but I didn't stop. I didn't complain. I just kept working, kept scrubbing, kept proving that I deserved to be there. And at the end of the day, Willis handed me $40 in cash. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "You did good, kid," he said. "Come back tomorrow." I nodded, unable to speak because I was afraid I might start crying. $40. I had earned $40 with my own hands, my own work. Nobody had given it to me out of pity. Nobody had made me feel like I owed them for it. It was mine, and I had earned it. That night, Willis let me sleep in the small office at the back of the car wash. It was just a cramped room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and an old couch that looked like it had seen better days. But it was shelter. It was safe. And Willis didn't ask any questions about why a 17-year-old kid needed a place to sleep. I settled into a routine. During the day, I worked at the car wash. At night, I did my homework in the office by the light of a single bulb. I was still going to school, walking miles each way because I couldn't afford the bus fare. I was exhausted all the time, running on adrenaline and determination, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was working towards something. I was building something. I had a goal, and nothing was going to stop me from reaching it. The months passed. I graduated from high school at the top of my class, despite everything. The guidance counselor helped me apply for scholarships, and I got accepted to a local community college with a full ride. I was going to college. Me, the kid nobody wanted, the burden, the orphan. I was going to college, and I was going to make something of myself. But before I could start, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 6 months after I had started working at the car wash. I was scrubbing a black sedan when I heard shouting. I looked up and saw 3 men surrounding a car that had just pulled in. They were young, probably in their 20s, and they had a dangerous energy about them. One of them pulled out a gun, and my blood went cold. They dragged an elderly man out of the car, shoving him against the hood. The old man was well dressed, probably in his 70s, with white hair and the kind of calm dignity that comes from a lifetime of confidence. But even he looked scared. For a moment, I froze. Every instinct told me to stay out of it, to keep my head down, to not get involved. I had learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems only brought trouble. But then I looked at the old man's face, really looked at it, and I saw something that made my heart clench. He looked resigned, like he had already accepted that this was how his story would end, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't stand by and watch another person get hurt when I had the power to do something about it. I grabbed the metal bucket I had been using, and I ran. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about the gun, or the fact that I could get shot. I just acted. I swung that bucket as hard as I could and connected with the back of the gunman's head. The gun went flying, clattering across the pavement. The other 2 men froze, shocked, and then they grabbed their friend and ran. Just ran. They disappeared down the street, and suddenly it was over. I stood there, breathing hard, holding that dented bucket in my shaking hands. The old man was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, and then he smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "You just saved my life, young man," he said. His voice was steady, calm, like he hadn't just been robbed at gunpoint. "Are you okay, sir?" I asked. He nodded, brushing off his suit. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lawrence," I said. "Lawrence Foster." He extended his hand, and I shook it. His grip was strong despite his age. "My name is Gilbert Dawson," he said, "and I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." I tried to tell him it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same thing, but he shook his head. "No," he said, "most people would have run. Most people would have looked the other way. But you didn't. You acted. That takes courage, and courage is rare." Gilbert asked me about myself, and I gave him the short version. I told him I was 17, that I worked at the car wash, that I was trying to get through the school. I didn't mention the relatives or the years of being unwanted. I didn't think he needed to know all that. But something in his eyes told me he understood anyway. There was a knowing look there, like he could see past the surface and into all the pain I carried. Before he left, he gave me his business card. It was simple, just his name and a phone number, but the card itself was expensive, heavy paper with embossed letters. "Call me," he said. "I want to help you." I nodded, but I didn't really believe it. People said things like that all the time. They made promises they never intended to keep. But I kept the card anyway, tucked it into my pocket, and went back to work. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the number on the card, half expecting it to be disconnected or for Gilbert to have forgotten who I was, but he answered on the second ring. "Lawrence," he said, and he sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. "I was hoping you'd call. Can you meet me tomorrow?" We met at a diner near the car wash. When Gilbert walked in, heads turned. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that only comes from real success. But when he sat down across from me, he didn't act superior or condescending. He just asked me about my life. And this time, I told him everything. I told him about my parents, about the relatives, about the years of being passed around and treated like I didn't matter. I told him about running away, about sleeping in the car wash office, about trying to finish school while working 12-hour days. And he listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and said something that would change my life forever. "Lawrence," he said, "I'm going to make you an offer. I want to pay for your education. I want to put you through university, help you build a future. And when you're ready, I want to bring you into my business." I stared at him, not sure if I had heard him correctly. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do that for me?" He smiled, and there was something sad in that smile. "Because I see potential in you," he said. "Because you have the kind of character that can't be taught, and because I never had a son. And I think you and I could help each other." I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever offered me anything like that. Nobody had ever seen potential in me. I was just a kid who washed cars. But Gilbert Dawson saw something else. He saw someone worth investing in, and I wasn't going to let him down. I accepted his offer, and my life began to change in ways I never could have imagined. Gilbert enrolled me in a private school to finish my senior year properly. He bought me clothes that fit, gave me a place to stay in a small but comfortable apartment he owned. But more than that, he mentored me. He taught me about business, about investing, about how to carry myself with confidence. He took me to meetings, introduced me to his associates, showed me how his empire worked, and I soaked it all up like a sponge. Gilbert Dawson wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan of industry, a man who had built a business empire worth over $600 million. He owned manufacturing plants, real estate, shipping companies, and a dozen other ventures, and he was patient with me, answering my questions, explaining things in ways I could understand. I studied harder than I had ever studied in my life. I stayed up late reading business books, learning about markets and finance and strategy, and Gilbert watched it all with the pride of a father watching his son grow. I graduated from high school at the top of my class, and Gilbert kept his promise. He sent me to university, to one of the best business schools in the country. I threw myself into my education with the same intensity I had thrown into everything else. I wasn't going to waste this opportunity. During breaks, I worked in Gilbert's offices, learning the day-to-day operations of running a massive corporation. I started in the mailroom and worked my way up, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand every level of the business. Gilbert introduced me to people as his protégé, and later, as his son. That word meant more to me than he could ever know. I had spent so many years without a family, without anyone who cared whether I lived or died. And suddenly, I had this man who was treating me like I mattered, like I was someone worth believing in. We had dinners together, long conversations about life and business and philosophy. He told me about his own childhood, about the struggles he had faced, about the mistakes he had made. He was teaching me not just how to be successful, but how to be a good man. 4 years passed. I graduated with honors. Gilbert offered me a position in his company, and I accepted without hesitation. I started as a junior executive, but Gilbert made sure I was involved in major decisions. He trusted me with responsibilities that other people twice my age would have killed for. And I proved myself. I worked harder than anyone else. I stayed late, came in early. I made deals that saved the company millions. I innovated, streamlined processes, identified opportunities that others had missed. By the time I was 25, I had become one of Gilbert's most valuable executives. By 30, I was running entire divisions of the company. Gilbert was getting older, slowing down, and he relied on me more and more. He told me once, late one night in his office, that I was the son he had never had, the legacy he had always hoped to leave behind. He told me that everything he had built was going to be mine someday, and I needed to be ready for it. I promised him I would be. I promised him I would honor everything he had taught me, that I would carry on his vision, that I would make him proud. When Gilbert Dawson passed away at the age of 82, it felt like losing my father all over again. He had been sick for months, his body finally giving out after decades of stress and hard work. The funeral was massive, attended by hundreds of people, business leaders, politicians, friends from all walks of life. And in his will, Gilbert did exactly what he had promised. He left everything to me, the entire empire, all $600 million worth of businesses and properties and investments. He left it to the boy he had found washing cars, the boy he had called his son. I was 33 years old, and suddenly I was one of the wealthiest men in the country. But the money didn't matter as much as what it represented. It represented Gilbert's faith in me. It represented years of hard work and sacrifice. It represented the journey from sleeping on cold floors to sitting in boardrooms, from being nobody to being somebody who mattered. I threw myself into running the business with everything I had. I expanded operations, made strategic acquisitions, grew the empire even further. I became known as a smart, disciplined businessman, someone who was tough but fair, someone who kept his word. I donated to charities, supported education programs, helped kids who were in the same situation I had once been in. I tried to honor Gilbert's memory in everything I did. But despite all the success, despite all the money and the power and the respect, there was something missing. I was lonely. I had business associates and acquaintances, but I didn't have anyone to share my life with. I didn't have someone to come home to, someone who cared about me as a person, and not just as a billionaire. I had spent so many years focused on survival, and then on success, that I had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another human being on a deeper level. And then I met her. Her name was Rose Holland, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I met her at a charity gala, one of those events where wealthy people gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. I usually found those events tedious, but Gilbert had always insisted on attending them, and I kept up the tradition. Rose was there with a friend, wearing a dress that seemed to shimmer under the lights. When she laughed, the sound cut through all the boring conversations and the clinking glasses like music. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I approached her, introduced myself, and we started talking. She was charming, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. She wasn't impressed by my wealth, or at least she didn't show it. She asked me about my work, my interests, my life, and she listened to my answers like they actually mattered. We talked for hours that night, standing in a corner of the ballroom, ignoring everyone else. When the event ended, I asked for her number. She smiled and wrote it on a napkin, and I felt like a teenager again, nervous and excited and hopeful. We started dating, and it felt like everything I had been missing was suddenly falling into place. Rose was everything I had ever wanted. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also intelligent and kind and funny. She made me laugh in ways I hadn't laughed in years. She made me feel like I was more than just a businessman, more than just the guy who ran a billion-dollar empire. She made me feel human. We went on dates, simple things like dinners and walks along the beach, and I found myself falling for her harder than I had ever fallen for anyone. 6 months after we met, I asked her to marry me. We were standing on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the sun set over the ocean, and I pulled out a ring and asked her if she would spend the rest of her life with me. She said yes, without hesitation, threw her arms around me. And I felt like the luckiest man alive. We got married 3 months later in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the water. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, everything I had thought I would never have, and for a while, everything was perfect. We moved into a glass mansion that sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was a stunning property, all modern architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows, with views that stretched for miles. Rose loved it. She said it felt like living inside a dream. She took charge of managing the household, hired staff, decorated the rooms, turned that house into a home. And I focused on running the business, on continuing to build the empire that Gilbert had left me. We were a team. We attended charity galas together, smiled for photographs, and looked like royalty. People envied us. They envied our life, our success, our apparent happiness. Rose managed the household staff, which included a housekeeper, a chef, a gardener, and a maid named Joanne. Joanne was a quiet woman in her 40s who kept to herself and did her job without complaint. She had been with us for 3 years, and I barely noticed her most of the time. She was just part of the background, someone who made sure the house ran smoothly while Rose and I lived our lives. But on that night, the night everything changed, Joanne became the most important person in the world. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just returned from a week-long business trip to New York. The trip had been exhausting, back-to-back meetings and negotiations that left me drained. All I wanted was to come home, have a quiet dinner, and relax. When I walked through the front door, the house was unusually silent. Normally, Rose would come to greet me, smiling and asking about my trip, but there was nobody. The lights were on, but the house felt empty, like everyone had disappeared. I set my luggage down in the foyer and walked through the house, calling out for Rose. No answer. The silence felt strange, oppressive even. I made my way to the dining room, and that's when I saw the table was set for one. A single place setting, a glass of water, and a bowl of pepper soup sitting in the center of the plate, steam rising from it. My favorite meal. Rose knew I always asked for pepper soup after a long trip. It was comforting, familiar, something that reminded me of simpler times. I sat down, exhausted, my muscles aching from hours of sitting in airports and conference rooms. I picked up the spoon, dipped it into the soup, and brought it toward my mouth. The steam warmed my face. The smell was perfect. And then the scream came. "Don't eat it, sir! Please, don't eat it!" Joanne came running into the dining room like her life depended on it. Her face was twisted in terror, her eyes wide, her hands reaching out toward me as if she could knock the spoon away from across the room. I froze, the spoon hovering inches from my lips. I stared at her, unable to process what was happening. She was trembling violently, her whole body shaking, and she kept repeating the same words over and over. "Don't eat it! Please, sir! Don't eat it! I set the spoon down slowly, my mind struggling to catch up. Joanne had never raised her voice in the 3 years she had worked for us. She was always calm, always composed, always professional. And now she was screaming at me, telling me not to eat my dinner. What was happening? Before I could ask her what was wrong, Rose burst into the dining room. She must have heard the scream because she came in fast, her eyes blazing with fury. "Are you insane?" Rose shouted at Joanne. "What are you doing?" Rose's face was flushed, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite place. Anger, yes, but also something else. Fear, maybe, or panic. Joanne didn't answer Rose. She fell to her knees in front of me, still trembling. She looked up at me, with tears streaming down her face. "Sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. I saw her putting something in the food." The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at Joanne, and then at Rose, and then at the bowl of soup in front of me. "What?" I finally managed to say. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. Joanne was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "I saw her, sir," she repeated. "In the kitchen. She was standing over the pot, and she took something from her pocket and put it in. I don't know what it was, but I saw her do it. And then she told the chef to serve it to you, just to you, nobody else." I looked at Rose. She was standing in the doorway, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was staring at Joanne with an expression of pure hatred. "She's lying," Rose said, her voice tight and controlled. "She's crazy. I don't know what she's talking about." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. This was my wife, the woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with. There was no reason for her to hurt me, no reason for her to put something in my food. But Joanne was on her knees in front of me, crying and shaking, and I could see the terror in her eyes. She believed what she was saying. She believed it with every fiber of her being. "Rose?" I said slowly, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "Is this true?" She looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face, something that looked like guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by indignation. "Of course it's not true," she said. "Lawrence, you can't seriously be listening to her. She's making this up. I don't know why, but she is." I looked back at Joanne. "What did you see?" I asked her. "Describe it to me." Joanne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself. "I was in the hallway," she said. "I was going to ask the chef about tomorrow's menu, and I saw Mrs. Holland standing at the stove. The chef had stepped out for a moment. She was alone, and she took a small bottle from her pocket, like a medicine bottle, and she poured something into the pot, just a little bit, and then she stirred it and put the bottle back in her pocket." "Where's the chef?" I asked. Joanne swallowed hard. "He's in his quarters, sir. Mrs. Holland told him to take the evening off after he served your dinner." I stood up from the table, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked over to Rose. "Show me your pockets," I said. Her eyes widened. "What?" she said. "Are you serious?" I didn't answer. I just held out my hand, waiting. For a moment I thought she was going to refuse. I thought she was going to turn and walk away, end this ridiculous confrontation. But instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled it inside out, empty. Then she did the same with the other pocket, also empty. "See?" she said, her voice rising. "There's nothing?" "Because I didn't do anything." But Joanne shook her head. "She had time to get rid of it, sir," she said quietly. "After I saw her, she went upstairs. She could have hidden it anywhere." I felt like the walls were closing in around me. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know who to trust. Part of me wanted to dismiss Joanne, to apologize to Rose for doubting her, to sit back down and eat my dinner and pretend this had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had survived years of hardship and learned to trust my instincts, was screaming at me to be careful. "I'm calling the police," I said. Rose's face went pale. "What? Lawrence, no, you can't be serious." But I was already pulling out my phone. "If there's nothing in the soup," I said, "then a toxicology test will prove that, and this whole thing will be over." Rose opened her mouth to argue, but then she closed it again. She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fine," she said. "Test it. You'll see that I'm right, and then we're going to have a serious conversation about firing her." She pointed at Joanne, who was still kneeling on the floor, looking like she might collapse at any moment. I called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes. I explained the situation, and they took the bowl of soup as evidence. Rose stood in the corner of the dining room the whole time, her arms crossed, her face a mask of calm confidence. She was so sure the test would come back clean. She was so sure that this would all blow over and life would go back to normal. But I watched her carefully, and I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way her hands were trembling slightly, the way she kept glancing at the door like she wanted to run, the way her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working, and I knew, somewhere deep in my gut, that Joanne was telling the truth. The police took statements from all of us. Joanne told them everything she had seen, her voice shaking but steady. Rose repeated her story, insisting that she was innocent, that Joanne was lying, that this was all some misunderstanding or some sick attempt to get attention. And I sat there, silent, trying to process the fact that my wife might have just tried to poison me. One of the officers, a detective named Clifford Warren, pulled me aside after they finished with Rose. "Mr. Foster," he said, his voice low, "I want you to be careful. If there's something in that soup, and if your wife put it there, then you're in danger. Real danger. Do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight?" I shook my head. "This is my house," I said. "I'm not leaving." He looked at me with concern. "I get that," he said. "But until we know what's going on, I'd recommend keeping some distance between you and your wife, and keep your maid close. If she's telling the truth, she might be in danger too." His words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't thought about that. If Rose had really tried to poison me, what would stop her from going after Joanne next? After the police left, the house felt different. The silence that had seemed peaceful before now felt suffocating, oppressive. Rose had gone upstairs to the bedroom without saying another word to me. Joanne was in the kitchen, sitting at the small table where the staff usually ate their meals, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. I sat down across from her, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Thank you," I finally said, "for what you did tonight, for telling me." Joanne looked up at me, and I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe she would just... I don't know. But I couldn't let you eat that food, sir. I couldn't." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing," I said. "Whatever happens next, you did the right thing." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "What if I'm wrong?" she asked. "What if I saw something that wasn't there? What if I just ruined your marriage over nothing?" I shook my head. "If you're wrong, the test will prove it," I said. "And then we'll deal with that." But Joanne, I saw her face. I saw the way she reacted. And I don't think you're wrong. We sat there for a while longer, not saying much, just existing in the strange limbo of not knowing. Eventually, I told Joanne to go to her quarters and lock the door. I told her not to open it for anyone except me, and to call me immediately if anything happened. She nodded and left. And I was alone in that massive house, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I didn't go upstairs that night. I couldn't bring myself to lie next to Rose, to pretend that everything was normal when it so clearly wasn't. Instead, I stayed in my office, sitting in the leather chair behind my desk, staring at the darkness outside the windows. The ocean was invisible in the night, but I could hear it, the waves crashing against the rocks below, constant and relentless. I thought about Gilbert, about everything he had taught me, everything he had given me. I thought about the boy I had been, sleeping on floors and going hungry, and the man I had become, and I thought about how quickly it could all be taken away. The next 3 days were torture. I went through the motions of life, going to meetings, making phone calls, managing the business, but my mind was somewhere else. It was in that dining room, watching Joanne scream, watching Rose's face go pale. Rose and I barely spoke during those days. We moved around the house like ghosts, avoiding each other, existing in separate worlds. She tried to talk to me once, tried to act like everything was fine, like we should just move past this and forget it ever happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't look at her without seeing that flicker of guilt in her eyes, that moment of fear before she put on her mask of innocence. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was Detective Warren. "Mr. Foster," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach drop. "We have the results from the toxicology report. You need to come down to the station immediately." I hung up the phone and stared at it in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. This was the moment when I would find out the truth, the moment that would either confirm my worst fears or prove that I was losing my mind. I grabbed my keys with trembling hands and headed for the door. But before I left, I stopped by Joanne's quarters. I knocked softly, and she opened the door a crack, peering out at me with wide, frightened eyes. "They have the results," I told her. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I'm going to the police station now." She nodded, and I saw relief mixed with terror in her expression. Relief that the waiting was over. Terror about what the results might say. "Whatever they found, sir," she said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to go through this." I tried to smile, but I don't think it worked. "None of this is your fault," I said. "You saved my life, Joanne. Don't ever forget that." The drive to the police station felt like it took hours, even though it was only 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, playing through every possible scenario. What if there was nothing in the soup? What if Joanne had been mistaken? What if the lighting in the kitchen had made her see something that wasn't there? What if I had just destroyed my marriage, called the police on my wife, put her through this nightmare, all over a misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew. I knew there was something in that soup. I knew Rose had put it there. I knew because of the way she had looked at me when Joanne made the accusation, that flash of guilt before she composed herself, the trembling in her hands that she tried so hard to hide, the way her voice had that edge of panic underneath all the indignation. You can't fake those things, or maybe you can, but not perfectly, not when you're caught off guard. When I arrived at the station, Detective Warren was waiting for me in the lobby. He looked serious, his face grave, and my stomach dropped even further. If the results had been negative, if there had been nothing in the soup, he would have told me over the phone. He wouldn't have asked me to come in. The fact that he wanted to see me in person meant something was wrong. Very wrong. "Mr. Foster," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip, trying to draw some strength from it. "Thank you for coming in so quickly. Let's go somewhere private where we can talk." He led me down a hallway and into a small conference room. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige, and there was a table in the center with 4 chairs around it. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, my legs feeling weak beneath me. Detective Warren sat down across from me and placed a manila folder on the table. He didn't open it right away. Instead, He looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy, part professional detachment. "Mr. Foster," he began, and I noticed he was choosing his words carefully. "The toxicology report came back positive. There were traces of a substance in the soup." The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What kind of substance?" I managed to ask. He opened the folder and pulled out several pages of technical reports. "It's a compound called thallium sulfate," he said. "It's a slow-acting toxin, very dangerous. The amount that was in the soup wasn't enough to cause immediate harm, but that's actually what makes it so insidious. If you had eaten that bowl of soup, and if you had continued to eat food prepared the same way over the next few weeks, the toxin would have built up in your system gradually." I stared at him, unable to speak. He continued, his voice steady but compassionate. "The symptoms would have started slowly. You would have experienced fatigue, maybe some stomach upset. Nothing that would seem particularly alarming at first, but over time it would have gotten worse. Heart palpitations, chest pain, shortness of breath. Eventually, within 3 to 4 weeks, you would have experienced what appeared to be a massive heart attack. And given your age and stress levels, nobody would have questioned it. It would have looked completely natural." The words hit me like physical blows. Rose had tried to kill me, not in a moment of rage, not in a sudden fit of passion, but slowly, methodically, with planning and premeditation. She had been willing to watch me suffer for weeks, to watch my health deteriorate, to watch me die in pain, all so she could inherit my money. "Are you absolutely certain?" I asked, even though I knew it was a pointless question. "There's no possibility of contamination or error?" Detective Warren shook his head. "We ran the tests 3 times using different samples. The results were consistent every time. There's no doubt. The toxin was in the soup, and it was deliberately placed there." He pulled out another sheet of paper. "There's more. We traced the purchase of the thallium sulfate. It's not something you can just buy at a pharmacy. It requires specific channels, and we were able to track the transaction through online records. The substance was ordered 3 months ago from a chemical supply company that operates in a legal gray area. They claim to sell to research laboratories, but they're known to be less than thorough in their verification processes." 3 months. She had been planning this for at least 3 months, maybe longer. "Who ordered it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Detective Warren met my eyes. "The account used to purchase the toxin was linked to an email address registered in your wife's name. The payment was made through a credit card that traces back to one of your joint accounts. We have the transaction records, the shipping confirmations, everything. It was delivered to a P.O. box in downtown Houston 3 months ago, and we have surveillance footage from the postal facility showing your wife collecting the package. I felt like I was going to be sick. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Rose had ordered poison. She had collected it. She had put it in my food. She had tried to kill me. My wife, the woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had literally tried to take that life from me." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now we arrest your wife," Detective Warren said. "We have more than enough evidence to charge her with attempted murder. But before we do that, I need to ask you some more questions. And I need to speak with your maid again. She may have seen or heard things that she didn't realize were important at the time." I nodded numbly. The detective asked me questions about Rose, about our marriage, about our finances. He asked if there had been any signs that something was wrong, any arguments or unusual behavior. I told him everything I could think of, which wasn't much. Our marriage had seemed perfect. Rose had never given me any reason to suspect her of anything. We had never fought about money. She had never seemed unhappy or resentful. She had been loving, affectionate, supportive. Or at least, that's what I had thought. Now I realized it had all been an act. a carefully constructed performance designed to keep me trusting her while she planned my death. "Has your wife had access to your financial accounts?" the detective asked. I nodded. "Yes, to some of them. She manages the household expenses, so I gave her access to certain accounts for bills, staff salaries, things like that. But the major business accounts, the investment portfolios, those were locked down with additional security measures." Detective Warren made notes. "We're going to need to do a complete audit of all your accounts," he said. "If your wife was planning to inherit your estate, there's a possibility she may have been moving money around, setting things up in advance." The thought hadn't even occurred to me, but now it made terrible sense. If Rose was planning to kill me, she would want to make sure she could access as much money as possible after I was gone. "How long will the audit take?" I asked. "A few weeks, probably," he said. "In the meantime, I strongly recommend you change all your passwords and security codes immediately, and you should contact your attorney to discuss protecting your assets." After the interview, Detective Warren told me they would be going to my house within the hour to arrest Rose. He asked if I wanted to be there when it happened, and I said no. I couldn't watch that. I couldn't see her being led away in handcuffs. Not yet. I needed time to process everything, to try to make sense of how my life had fallen apart so completely. I drove to a coffee shop near the station and sat in a corner booth, staring at my untouched cup of coffee. My phone rang. It was Joanne. "Mr. Foster," she said, her voice urgent. "The police are here. They're upstairs with Mrs. Holland right now. I can hear her crying and shouting. Sir, what did the test show?" I closed my eyes. "There was poison in the soup," I said. "Just like you saw. You were right, Joanne. You saved my life." I heard her gasp on the other end of the line. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, I knew what I saw, but I kept hoping maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some other explanation." "There isn't," I said. "The police have proof. They're arresting her now." There was silence on the line for a moment, and then Joanne spoke again. "Sir, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I didn't mention before because I wasn't sure if it was important. But now I think it might be." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" I asked. "Over the past few months," she said carefully, "I've heard Mrs. Holland on the phone late at night. She would go out to the garden, I think because she thought nobody could hear her. But sometimes I was cleaning the windows or couldn't sleep, and I would hear her voice. She was talking to someone, a man, and the way she talked to him, sir. It wasn't professional, it wasn't friendly, it was intimate. She would tell him she loved him. She would tell him they would be together soon. She said she was taking care of everything, and that soon they would have everything they ever wanted." The betrayal cut even deeper. Of course there was another man. Of course there was. Rose hadn't just been planning to kill me for money. She had been planning to kill me so she could run off with her lover. "Did she ever mention his name?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears. "Yes, sir," Joanne said. "She called him Harvey, and once I heard her say his full name, Harvey Dawson." The name hit me like a freight train. Dawson, Gilbert's last name. But that was impossible. Gilbert never had children. He had told me that himself, many times. He had said I was the closest thing to a son he ever had. There was no Harvey Dawson. There couldn't be. "Are you absolutely sure that's what you heard?" I asked. "Yes, sir," Joanne said firmly. "I heard it multiple times. Harvey Dawson, I'm certain." I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. Who was Harvey Dawson? Was he related to Gilbert somehow? A nephew, maybe? A distant cousin? And how had Rose met him? How long had they been together? I called Detective Warren immediately. "I just spoke with my maid," I said. "She has more information. My wife has been having conversations with someone named Harvey Dawson. Rose told him she loved him, that they would be together soon, that she was taking care of everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dawson, the detective repeated. That's the same last name as Gilbert Dawson, the man who left you his fortune, correct? I confirmed it, and he said, All right, Mr. Foster, we're going to look into this Harvey Dawson immediately. This changes things significantly. If your wife had an accomplice, if someone helped her plan this, they'll face charges as well. And if there's a connection to Gilbert Dawson, we need to understand what that is. I drove back to my house, even though I knew I shouldn't. I knew the police would still be there, that Rose would still be there, and that seeing her would only make things worse. But I couldn't help myself. I needed to see her face. I needed to look into her eyes and try to understand how the woman I loved could have done this to me. When I pulled up to the house, there were 2 police cars in the driveway. As I walked toward the front door, I saw them bringing Rose out. She was in handcuffs, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her hair was messy, and her face was red from crying. When she saw me, her expression changed. For a moment she looked relieved, like she thought I had come to save her. But then she must have seen something in my face, something cold and hard, because her expression crumbled. "Lawrence," she called out, her voice breaking. "Lawrence, please, you have to listen to me. I can explain everything." I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching as they led her to the patrol car. She kept looking back at me, kept calling my name, but I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched as they put her in the back of the car and drove away. And then she was gone, and I was standing alone in my driveway, wondering how I had ended up here, how I had gone from being a happily married man to watching my wife get arrested for trying to murder me. I went inside and found Joanne in the living room. She looked shaken, her face pale. "Are you all right?" I asked, and she nodded, though I could see she wasn't. "Detective Warren wants me to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement about the phone calls I heard," she said. "He said they're going to need to know everything, every detail I can remember." I told her I would go with her, that she wouldn't have to face this alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my relationship with Rose, looking for the signs I had missed, looking for the clues that should have warned me, but there was nothing. She had been perfect. Too perfect, maybe. She had said all the right things, done all the right things. She had made me believe that she loved me, that she was happy with our life together, and all of it had been a lie. I thought about our first date. We had gone to a small Italian restaurant downtown, nothing fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. She had asked me about my childhood, and I had told her about my parents, about losing them when I was young. She had reached across the table and taken my hand, and she had looked at me with such compassion, such understanding. "That must have been so hard," she had said. "But look at you now. Look at everything you've accomplished. Your parents would be so proud." I had believed her. I had thought she genuinely cared about my pain, about my story. But now I realized she had probably been taking mental notes, filing away information she could use later to manipulate me. Every tear she had shed, every sympathetic word, every gentle touch had been calculated. She had studied me like a scientist studies a specimen, learning my weaknesses, my triggers, my needs, so she could exploit them. The next morning, Joanne and I went to the police station. Detective Warren met us there, along with another detective named Russell Hopkins, who specialized in financial crimes. They took Joanne into an interview room first, and I waited in the lobby, drinking terrible coffee from a vending machine and watching the clock on the wall tick by. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, Joanne came out, looking exhausted, but relieved. "They recorded everything," she told me. "Every conversation I heard. every detail I could remember. They said it's going to be important evidence. Then it was my turn. I went into the interview room, and both detectives were there with recording equipment and stacks of files. "Mr. Foster," Detective Hopkins began, "we've been conducting a preliminary audit of your financial accounts, and we've discovered some irregularities that we need to discuss with you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked. He opened one of the files and spread several pages of transaction records across the table. "Over the past 2 years," he said, "there have been numerous transfers from your accounts to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The transfers were relatively small at first, $10,000 to $20,000 at a time, but they increased in frequency and amount over time. In total, we've identified approximately $40 million that has been moved out of your accounts." $40 million? I stared at the records, unable to believe what I was seeing. The numbers swam before my eyes, pages and pages of transactions I had never authorized, money disappearing from accounts I thought were secure. "I never authorized any of these transfers," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't even know these accounts in the Cayman Islands existed." Detective Hopkins nodded. "We believe your wife set them up using your information. She had access to some of your accounts, and it appears she used that access to set up additional accounts that she could control. The transfers were structured to avoid triggering automatic alerts. They were spread out over time, moved through multiple intermediate accounts to obscure the trail. It was sophisticated financial fraud." "Can we recover the money?" I asked. He hesitated. "We're working on it," he said. "The Cayman Islands have strict banking privacy laws, but because this is a criminal case involving attempted murder, we may be able to work with their authorities to freeze and recover the assets. It's going to take time, but there's a good chance we can get at least some of it back." I felt numb. $40 million? Rose hadn't just been planning to kill me. She had been robbing me for 2 years, taking my money, hiding it away, preparing for the day when I would be gone, and she could disappear with everything. "Is there more?" I asked, because I could tell from their expressions that there was. Detective Warren pulled out another file, but this one he handled more carefully, like it contained something explosive. "We've started investigating this Harvey Dawson that your maid mentioned," he said. "We're still gathering information, but what we've found so far is concerning. We need to dig deeper before we can give you the full picture, but I want you to know that we're treating this as a conspiracy case now. Your wife didn't act alone. She had help, and we're going to find out exactly who this Harvey Dawson is and what role he played in all of this." The word conspiracy made everything feel more real, more terrifying. This wasn't just my wife making a terrible decision. This was planned, coordinated, executed with help from someone else, someone who shared Gilbert's last name, someone who might have a connection to the man who saved my life. "How long will it take to get answers?" I asked. "We're moving as fast as we can," Detective Warren said. "We've already started pulling records, tracking down leads. Within a week or two, we should have a much clearer picture of who Harvey Dawson is and what his connection to your wife is. In the meantime, I need you to be very careful. If there's an accomplice out there, and if they realize we're investigating, they might try to cover their tracks or even flee the country." I left the police station feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Every new piece of information made the betrayal deeper, more complex, more devastating. Rose wasn't just a wife who had tried to poison her husband. She was part of something bigger, something more sinister. And Harvey Dawson, whoever he was at the center of it. The days that followed were a fog of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and investigators. My legal team worked around the clock to protect my remaining assets, to change passwords and security protocols, to build a wall around my finances that nobody could penetrate. The forensic accountants dug deeper into the stolen money, tracing it through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Every day they uncovered more transfers, more theft, more evidence of a conspiracy that had been years in the making. The media found out about Rose's arrest, and suddenly my private nightmare became public entertainment. Reporters camped outside my house, my office, anywhere they thought they might catch a glimpse of me. They called constantly, sent emails, tried every trick to get me to comment. I refused. I wouldn't give them my pain, wouldn't let them turn my tragedy into their story. I hired security to keep them away. But they were persistent, relentless, like vultures circling a dying animal. I visited Rose in jail about 2 weeks after her arrest. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to look her in the eye and hear her try to explain the inexplicable. Maybe I just needed to see her one more time to confirm that the woman I had loved really was gone, replaced by this stranger who had tried to kill me. The jail was exactly as depressing as I expected. Fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and ugly. Concrete walls, painted institutional beige. The smell of cleaning chemicals and despair. They led me to a small visiting room with a table and 2 chairs separated by a thick glass partition. I sat down and waited, my heart pounding despite my attempts to stay calm. When they brought Rose in, I barely recognized her. She looked haggard, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. The orange jumpsuit hung off her frame, making her look even smaller and more fragile. But when she saw me through the glass, her face lit up like I had just given her the greatest gift in the world. "Lawrence," she said, picking up the phone on her side of the glass. Her voice was hoarse, like she had been crying for days. "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd want to hear my side of the story." I picked up the phone on my side, but didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. But another part of me was just empty, hollowed out by the betrayal. She took a shaky breath, and I could see her trying to compose herself, trying to find the right words. "I need you to understand something," she said, her words coming fast, desperate. "I never meant to hurt you. I swear, Lawrence, I never wanted to hurt you." I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and suffocating. "You put poison in my food," I said, my voice cold and flat. "You planned to watch me die slowly over several weeks. How is that not wanting to hurt me?" She shook her head frantically, tears already streaming down her face. "No," she said. "No, you don't understand. I wasn't trying to kill you. I was trying to kill Joanne." I stared at her, stunned. For a moment I couldn't process what she had just said. "What?" I finally managed. "You were trying to kill Joanne?" She nodded. Her hands pressed against the glass like she was trying to reach through it to me. "Yes," she said. "Joanne found out about the money. She saw something on my laptop, some banking records I had left open by accident. She confronted me about it, told me she was going to tell you. I panicked, Lawrence. I couldn't let her tell you. I couldn't lose everything I had worked for. So I thought if she was gone, if she had an accident or something, the secret would be safe." "So you decided to poison her," I said. My voice was flat, emotionless, because I couldn't let myself feel anything or I would fall apart. Rose wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I wasn't thinking clearly," she said. "I was desperate. I put the poison in the soup, and I told the chef to serve it to you because I thought Joanne would taste it first. She always tastes the food before it's served to you, making sure everything is perfect. And I thought the chef would taste it too, like he usually does. But everything went wrong. The chef didn't taste it. Joanne saw me and didn't go near the food. and you came home earlier than I expected." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, sitting in jail, facing attempted murder charges, she was still lying, still trying to manipulate me. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" I asked. "The police told me about the toxin. It was slow acting. It would have built up in my system over weeks. If you were trying to kill Joanne, you would have used something faster, something that would have worked in one dose." Her face crumpled, and she started sobbing harder. "I made a mistake," she said. "I didn't know enough about it. I just ordered what I could find online, and I thought if I put enough in the soup, it would work quickly. I didn't understand how it worked. I was stupid and desperate, and I made a terrible mistake." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Lawrence, please, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you have to understand why. You have to understand what drove me to this." "Tell me about the money," I said, ignoring her plea. "Tell me about the $40 million you stole from me." She flinched like I had slapped her. "I was going to pay it back," she said quietly. "I was investing it, trying to make more money so I could eventually return it to your accounts and you'd never know. I wanted to prove I could be successful too, that I could contribute something to our marriage beyond just managing the household." "That's a lie," I said. "The money was hidden in offshore accounts. You were preparing to disappear with it." She shook her head violently. "No," she said. "That's not true. I was just being careful, keeping it separate so you wouldn't find out until I was ready to surprise you. Harvey said it was the best way to—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes going wide as she realized what she had just said. "Harvey," I repeated slowly. "Tell me about Harvey Dawson." She looked down at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. "He's just a friend," she said. "Someone I met online who gave me investment advice. That's all." I leaned forward, my voice hard. "Your maid heard you talking to him. She heard you tell him you loved him. She heard you say you'd be together soon. So don't sit there and lie to me anymore, Rose. I'm done with your lies." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I could barely hear her. "I met Harvey 5 years ago," she said, "before I even met you. He was charming and intelligent, and he understood me in a way nobody else ever had. We became close, and yes, we fell in love. But then he told me about you, about Gilbert Dawson, about everything, and he asked me to help him. He said you had stolen everything that should have been his, that you had manipulated an old man into giving you a fortune that belonged to Harvey by blood, and I believed him." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, belonged to him by blood?" I asked. She looked up at me, and I saw something like guilt in her eyes. "I shouldn't say more," she said. "My lawyer told me not to talk about Harvey, but Lawrence, you have to understand, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought we were taking back what was rightfully his." "So you agreed to marry me," I said. "You agreed to steal from me. You agreed to kill me. All for Harvey." She was crying again, but this time it looked different, less manipulative, more genuine. Or maybe I just wanted to believe there was some part of the woman I loved still in there somewhere. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "It was just supposed to be the money. We were going to take the money and disappear, and you would never know. But then Joanne found out, and everything spiraled out of control." "And killing me?" I pressed. "Was that part of the original plan, or did you come up with that later?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, and I knew the truth. It had always been the plan. From the moment Harvey Dawson, whoever he was, had recruited her to this scheme, the end game had been my death. "I need you to understand," she finally said. "Harvey told me terrible things about you. He said you had destroyed his life, taken everything from him, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because it made what we were doing seem justified. I stood up, still holding the phone. "Nothing justifies what you did," I said. "Nothing makes it okay that you betrayed someone who loved you, who trusted you, who would have given you anything you asked for. You chose greed over integrity. You chose a con man over a husband. You chose wrong, Rose, and now you're going to spend the rest of your life paying for those choices." She reached out toward the glass, her hand trembling. "Lawrence, please," she said. "Please don't leave like this. I need you to understand. I need you to forgive me." But I was already putting down the phone. I walked out of that visiting room without looking back, leaving her crying and calling my name. She didn't deserve my understanding. She didn't deserve my forgiveness. She deserved exactly what she was getting. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. I went through the motions of living, but I felt like a ghost in my own body. I would wake up in the morning and forget, just for a moment, what had happened, and then it would all come crashing back. Rose had tried to kill me. She had stolen from me. She had never loved me. Every moment of our marriage had been a lie. And somewhere out there was Harvey Dawson, the man who had orchestrated everything, the man whose connection to Gilbert was still a mystery. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like ashes in my mouth. I lost weight, my clothes hanging looser on my frame. I couldn't focus on work. I would sit in meetings, and people would be talking, making presentations, asking for decisions, and I couldn't follow what they were saying. My assistant started covering for me, rescheduling appointments, handling things I should have been handling myself. My business partners were concerned, calling to check on me, but I couldn't bring myself to care. At night, I would lie awake for hours, my mind spinning through every memory, every moment, looking for the truth beneath the lies. I remembered our wedding day. Rose had looked so beautiful in her white dress, standing at the altar with tears in her eyes. She had said her vows with such conviction, promising to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death did us part. And I had believed every word. I had stood there feeling like the luckiest man alive, not knowing that the woman I was marrying was already planning my death. I remembered our honeymoon in Hawaii. We had spent 2 weeks on a private beach, just the two of us, and it had been perfect. Or so I had thought. Rose had been attentive, loving, passionate. We had talked for hours about our future, about the life we would build together, about the children we might have someday. And all of it had been a performance. She had been acting out a script written by Harvey Dawson, playing a role designed to ensure my trust, my love, my eventual murder. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed every sign, every clue? I was supposed to be a smart businessman, someone who could read people, who could spot a bad deal from a mile away. But Rose had fooled me completely. She had made me into a fool, and now everyone knew it. The media coverage was constant, dissecting every detail of our relationship, interviewing people who claimed to know us, speculating about how long Rose had been planning this. Joanne was the only person who understood what I was going through. She had been targeted too, marked for death by a woman we had both trusted. We would sit together in the kitchen late at night, drinking tea, not saying much, just being there for each other. She was afraid. I could see it in her eyes. Afraid that Rose might somehow get out of jail. Afraid that Harvey Dawson might come after her to silence the witness who had ruined their plans. I promised her I would keep her safe, that I would hire the best security money could buy, that nothing would happen to her. But I could see the fear never quite left her eyes. Detective Warren called me regularly with updates on the investigation. They were digging into Harvey Dawson's background, trying to understand who he was and what his connection to Gilbert might be. They had found more evidence of communication between Rose and Harvey. emails and text messages that laid out their conspiracy in shocking detail. They had documented every step of the plan, every manipulation, every theft, every preparation for my death. "Mr. Foster," Detective Warren said during one of our calls, "I need to prepare you for something. What we're uncovering about Harvey Dawson and his connection to Gilbert Dawson is going to be difficult to hear. We're still verifying some information, but it looks like this conspiracy goes deeper than we initially thought. Harvey's motivation wasn't just greed, it was personal, very personal." "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "I can't give you all the details yet," he said, "but I will soon. Just know that when you hear the full story, it's going to change how you see everything. It's going to change how you see Gilbert, how you see Harvey, how you see this entire situation. And I'm sorry for that. I know Gilbert meant a lot to you." His words haunted me. What could Harvey Dawson's connection to Gilbert possibly be? A business rival that Gilbert had ruined? A relative that Gilbert had wronged somehow? Whatever it was bad enough that the detective felt the need to warn me. I spent my days in a fog of anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that more pain was coming, but not knowing when or how. 3 weeks after Rose's arrest, Detective Warren called and asked me to come to the station. "We have information about Harvey Dawson," he said. "Information you need to hear in person." I drove there with my hands shaking on the wheel, knowing that whatever he was about to tell me would change everything again. The investigation was far from over. The conspiracy was deeper than anyone had imagined, and Harvey Dawson, the man whose name shared Gilbert's, was about to become more than just a mysterious accomplice. He was about to become the key to understanding why my marriage had been a trap from the very beginning. I walked into the police station with a sense of dread settling in my chest like a stone. Detective Warren was waiting for me in the lobby, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Whatever he was about to tell me was going to hurt. He led me back to the same conference room where he had shown me the toxicology report, where he had first confirmed that Rose had tried to kill me. The room already held so many painful memories, and I knew it was about to hold one more. Mr. Foster," he said as we sat down, "thank you for coming in. I know this has been an incredibly difficult time for you, and I'm sorry to add to that burden. But what we've discovered about Harvey Dawson is something you need to know." He placed a thick folder on the table between us, and I could see it was filled with documents, photographs, and reports. "We've been digging into Harvey's background for the past 3 weeks, and what we found explains everything. His motivation, his hatred, why he targeted you specifically." I braced myself. "Tell me," I said. Detective Warren opened the folder and pulled out a birth certificate. It was old, yellowed with age, but the information on it was clear. Harvey Dawson, born 45 years ago in Los Angeles, California. Mother's name, Virginia Foster. Father's name, Gilbert Dawson. I stared at the document, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "Gilbert had a son," I said slowly. "But that's impossible. He told me he never had children. He said I was the closest thing to a son he ever had." Detective Warren nodded. "Gilbert did have a son," he said, "but he abandoned him before he was born. We tracked down people who knew Virginia Foster, Harvey's mother. They told us that Virginia and Gilbert had a brief relationship when Gilbert was in his early 20s. This was before he built his empire, before he became the man you knew. Virginia got pregnant, and when she told Gilbert, he gave her $5,000 and told her to never contact him again. He denied that the child was his, even though he knew it was. He wanted to focus on his business, on building his fortune, and he didn't want the burden of a family holding him back." The words hit me like physical blows. Gilbert, The man who had saved me, who had been like a father to me, had abandoned his own son. What happened to Virginia and Harvey? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Virginia raised Harvey alone, Detective Warren said. She worked multiple jobs, struggled to make ends meet, lived in poverty for most of Harvey's childhood. She told Harvey about his father, about the wealthy man who had rejected them, and Harvey grew up with that knowledge, with the anger and resentment that comes from being unwanted. He pulled out more documents, photographs of a young Harvey with his mother. In the pictures, they looked happy despite their circumstances, but I could see the strain in Virginia's face, the weariness that comes from working too hard for too little. Virginia passed away when Harvey was 20, Detective Warren continued. She had been sick for years, couldn't afford proper medical care. When she died, Harvey was left with nothing. No money, no family, no support, and he blamed Gilbert for all of it. I felt sick. If Gilbert had just acknowledged his son, if he had provided even basic support, none of this would have happened. Harvey wouldn't have grown up in poverty. Virginia might have been able to afford the medical care she needed, and I wouldn't be sitting here learning that the man I idolized had destroyed lives with his selfishness. Did Harvey ever try to contact Gilbert? I asked. Detective Warren pulled out a stack of letters, copies that had been provided by people who knew Harvey. He tried multiple times, he said. When he was a teenager, he wrote to Gilbert, trying to establish a relationship with his father. The letters were returned unopened. When his mother got sick, Harvey wrote again, begging for help with medical bills. Gilbert's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter, threatening legal action if Harvey continued to make contact. And when Virginia died, Harvey wrote one final letter, not asking for money, just asking to be acknowledged, to be seen. Gilbert never responded. I read through some of the letters, and they broke my heart. They were written by a young man desperate for connection, for recognition, for the simple acknowledgement that he existed and mattered to his father. And Gilbert had rejected him every single time. When did Harvey find out about me? I asked. Detective Warren's expression grew even more serious. When Gilbert passed away, and his will became public record, Harvey learned that everything had been left to you. A man Gilbert had known for less than 20 years, a man with no blood connection to him, and Harvey felt like it was the ultimate betrayal. The detective pulled out printed copies of blog posts and online rants that Harvey had written under various pseudonyms. In them, he poured out his rage and pain. He talked about watching from a distance as his father built an empire, attended charity galas, was lauded as a philanthropist and business leader. He talked about the injustice of being denied while a stranger was given everything. And he talked about revenge, about making me pay for stealing what should have been his. That's when Harvey started planning, Detective Warren said. He spent years researching you, learning everything about you, where you went, who you associated with, what your weaknesses were. And then he found Rose. He pulled out more documents, showing how Harvey had targeted Rose specifically. He had found her through the social media, seen that she attended some of the same charity events that I did. He had initiated contact carefully, slowly building a relationship with her online. Harvey told Rose his story, the detective explained. But he didn't tell her the truth. He told her that you had manipulated Gilbert, turned him against his biological son, stolen an inheritance that rightfully belonged to Harvey. He painted you as a con man, a villain who had destroyed his life. And Rose believed him. I looked at the messages between Harvey and Rose, seeing how he had manipulated her, groomed her, convinced her that helping him was an act of justice rather than betrayal. When did they plan to kill me? I asked. Was that always part of it, or did it escalate over time? Detective Warren showed me more messages, a timeline of their conspiracy that stretched back 5 years. It started with just the money, he said. Harvey convinced Rose to get close to you, to marry you, to gain access to your accounts. The plan was to steal as much as possible and then disappear together. But about 2 years ago, the plan changed. Harvey became impatient. He wanted everything, not just what they could steal. He wanted you to suffer the way he had suffered. He wanted you to lose everything the way he had lost everything. The detective showed me emails where Harvey had researched poisons, where he had found suppliers, where he had coached Rose on how to administer the toxin without getting caught. It was all laid out in chilling detail, a murder plot that had taken months to plan and prepare. Rose ordered the poison 3 months ago, Detective Warren said. But we found evidence that they had been planning your death for much longer. They were just waiting for the right time, the right method. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was premeditated murder, planned over years, executed with cold calculation. And it had all started because Gilbert had abandoned his son. Where is Harvey now? I asked. We arrested him in California the day after Rose was taken into custody, Detective Warren said. He's being held without bail, charged as a co-conspirator in attempted murder, along with fraud, theft, and conspiracy charges. He's fighting extradition, but it's only a matter of time before he's brought here to stand trial alongside Rose. The detective pulled out one more document, and this one made my blood run cold. It was a detailed plan, written by Harvey, outlining what would happen after my death. Rose would inherit my estate, play the grieving widow for 6 months, then quietly move to California where Harvey was waiting. They would combine the stolen money with my inheritance, change their identities, and start a new life in another country. Harvey had even picked out the country, Argentina, because it had no extradition treaty with the United States. They had thought of everything, I said, staring at the plan. They really thought they would get away with this. Detective Warren nodded. They would have, he said quietly. If your maid hadn't seen Rose that night, if she hadn't had the courage to scream, if you hadn't listened to her instead of dismissing her, Harvey and Rose would be free right now. Living off your money while you were dead and buried, Joanne saved both your lives. I left the police station in a daze. The revelation about Harvey being Gilbert's son changed everything. It didn't excuse what he had done, didn't make the attempted murder acceptable. But it explained it. It made it human instead of just evil. Harvey wasn't some random criminal. He was a man who had been rejected his entire life, who had watched his mother die because his father wouldn't help, who had seen everything that should have been his given to a stranger. The anger, the resentment, the desire for revenge, I understood it, even if I couldn't forgive it. But I also felt a deep sense of betrayal toward Gilbert. The man I had idolized, the man who had saved me and given me everything, had created this situation. His selfishness, his rejection of his own son, had set all of this in motion. If he had just been a father to Harvey, if he had provided even basic support, none of this would have happened. Harvey wouldn't have grown up filled with rage. He wouldn't have recruited Rose. He wouldn't have tried to kill me. Gilbert's sins had come back to haunt me, and I had nearly died for them. The weeks that followed were consumed by preparation for the trial. The prosecutor's office was building their case against Rose and Harvey, and they needed my testimony. I met with lawyers, went over evidence, prepared for the questions I would be asked on the stand. It was exhausting and re-traumatizing, having to relive every moment of the betrayal over and over again. But I knew I had to do it. I had to make sure Rose and Harvey paid for what they had done. Joanne was preparing to testify as well. She was terrified, afraid of facing Rose in court, afraid of what Harvey might do if he ever got free. I hired the best security team money could buy to protect her. Armed guards watched her quarters around the clock. She couldn't leave the property without an escort, It was no way to live, but it was necessary. She was the star witness, the person who had seen Rose poisoning my food, and both Rose and Harvey's lawyers would try to discredit her testimony. The media attention intensified as the trial date approached. Reporters dug into every aspect of the story, uncovering details about Gilbert's relationship with Virginia Foster, about Harvey's childhood, about Rose's background. They interviewed people from Harvey's past who described him as angry and bitter. They interviewed people from Rose's past who said she had always wanted more than she had, always felt like she deserved better. The narrative they created was of two damaged people who had found each other and turned their pain into something monstrous. I stopped reading the articles after a while. I couldn't stand seeing my life, my pain, my humiliation turned into entertainment. The trial was set to begin on a cold Monday morning in November, almost 6 months after that night when Joanne had screamed and saved my life. I arrived at the courthouse early, surrounded by security, trying to ignore the crowd of reporters shouting questions at me. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, people who had come to witness the spectacle. Rose and Harvey were brought in separately, both in prison uniforms, both in handcuffs. I forced myself to look at them, to really see them. Rose looked thin and tired, her beauty faded by months in jail. But there was still defiance in her eyes, still a spark of the woman who had thought she could get away with murder. Harvey was harder to look at. He had Gilbert's eyes, the same intelligent gaze that had seen through me and recognized potential all those years ago. But where Gilbert's eyes had been kind, Harvey's were cold and filled with hatred. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, presenting evidence of the conspiracy, the poison, the stolen money, the forged documents. They called forensic experts who testified about the toxin found in the soup, about how it would have killed me slowly, painfully, in a way that would have looked like natural causes. They called financial experts who traced the $40 million through a web of offshore accounts and shell companies. And then they called Joanne. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, even though I could see her hands trembling. The prosecutor asked her to describe what she had seen that night in the kitchen, and she told the story clearly, calmly, without embellishment. She described seeing Rose standing over the pot of soup, taking a small bottle from her pocket, pouring something into the food, stirring it, then putting the bottle away. She described the fear she had felt, the certainty that something was wrong, the decision to scream even though she didn't know what would happen. Rose's lawyer tried to discredit her during cross-examination, suggesting she had misinterpreted what she saw, that the lighting in the kitchen could have created shadows, that she had a grudge against Rose and wanted to cause trouble. But Joanne didn't waver. She answered every question honestly, admitted when she wasn't certain about details, but held firm on what she had seen. By the time she stepped down from the stand, I could see that the jury believed her. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and told my story, from the beginning. I told them about being an orphan, about Gilbert saving me, about building the empire together. I told them about meeting Rose, about falling in love, about believing I had found the happiness I had always dreamed of. And I told them about that night, about the scream, about the fear, about the betrayal that had shattered everything. The prosecutor asked me how the attempted murder had affected me, and I struggled to find words adequate to describe the devastation. I trusted her with my life, I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed, and she tried to take that life from me. She stole my money, but that's not what hurts. She stole my ability to trust, my sense of security, my faith in people. She made me question every moment of happiness we shared, made me wonder if any of it was real. And the answer is no. None of it was real. It was all a performance designed to manipulate me into loving her so she could destroy me. Rose's lawyer tried to make me seem like a cold, calculating businessman who had never really loved his wife, who was exaggerating the emotional damage for sympathy. But I didn't let him rattle me. I told the truth, and I could see in the jurors' faces that they understood. They understood what it meant to be betrayed by someone you love. They understood the depth of the pain. Harvey testified in his own defense, against his lawyer's advice. He took the stand and told his story, about being abandoned by Gilbert, about growing up in poverty, about watching his mother die. He talked about the injustice of being denied while I was given everything, and he admitted that yes, he had recruited Rose, yes, he had planned to steal from me, but he insisted he had never intended for anyone to die. He claimed that poisoning me was Rose's idea, that she had acted on her own, that he had tried to stop her when he found out. But the prosecutor destroyed him on cross-examination. They showed him emails he had written to Rose about poisons, about methods of murder, about making me suffer. They showed him the detailed plan he had written for after my death, the one that outlined exactly how they would inherit my fortune and disappear. Harvey tried to explain, tried to justify, but every word made him look more guilty. By the time he stepped down, I could see the jury had made up their minds. Rose didn't testify. Her lawyer advised her to stay silent, to not give the prosecution any more ammunition. So she sat at the defense table, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the repentant wife who had made a terrible mistake. But I saw through it. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she watched the jury, trying to gauge their reactions. Even now, even facing life in prison, she was still performing, still trying to manipulate. The closing arguments were powerful. The prosecutor painted Rose and Harvey as cold-blooded conspirators who had planned my murder for years, who had stolen millions from me, who would have succeeded if not for the bravery of one maid. The defense lawyers tried to create reasonable doubt, tried to suggest that maybe the poison had been intended for someone else, that maybe Harvey hadn't known about the murder plot. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw through the lies. It took them less than 2 days to reach a verdict. When the foreman stood up and announced guilty on all counts, I felt something release inside me. Not joy exactly, not satisfaction, just a sense that justice had been served, that Rose and Harvey would pay for what they had done. The judge set a sentencing date for 2 weeks later, and Rose and Harvey were led out of the courtroom. Rose looked back at me one last time, and I saw tears in her eyes, but I didn't know if they were real or just another performance. The sentencing hearing was shorter, but no less emotional. The prosecutor asked for the maximum sentence, arguing that the crime was premeditated, calculated, and would have succeeded if not for luck and the bravery of a witness. Rose's lawyer asked for leniency, arguing that she had been manipulated by Harvey, that she deserved a chance at rehabilitation. Harvey's lawyer argued that his client's difficult childhood and the betrayal by his father should be considered as mitigating factors, but the judge wasn't swayed. She looked at Rose and Harvey with an expression of disgust and pronounced their sentences. Rose was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Harvey was sentenced to 30 years without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. They would both be old by the time they got out, their lives effectively over. As the bailiffs led them away, Harvey looked at me with such hatred that I felt it like a physical force, but Rose just looked broken, defeated, like she had finally accepted that the game was over and she had lost. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse and made a brief statement to the media. I thanked the police, the prosecutors, and especially Joanne for her courage. I said that while justice had been served, no sentence could undo the damage that had been done, and I said that I hoped people would learn from my story, that they would be more careful about who they trusted, more aware of the signs of manipulation and deception. Then I got in my car and drove away, leaving the circus behind. The weeks after the trial were strange. On one hand, I felt relief that it was over, that Rose and Harvey were behind bars and couldn't hurt anyone else. But on the other hand, I felt empty. The trial had given me a sense of purpose, something to focus on besides my pain. Now that it was over, I had to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I had to figure out how to move forward when everything I had believed about my marriage, about Gilbert, about trust and love, had been shattered. I threw myself into work, using the business as a distraction from my thoughts. The company had suffered during my distraction, and there was a lot to catch up on. But I found that work couldn't hold my attention the way it once had. The deals that used to excite me felt meaningless. The success that used to drive me felt hollow. I had spent so many years building wealth and power, but what was the point if I had no one to share it with? If I couldn't trust anyone enough to let them into my life? My lawyers had managed to recover most of the stolen money. The offshore accounts had been frozen, and through cooperation with international authorities, they had traced and recovered approximately $38 million of the $40 million that Rose and Harvey had stolen. The remaining $2 million was lost in various transaction fees and accounts they couldn't access. But even getting the money back didn't make me feel better. It was just numbers in an account, meaningless without someone to share my life with. I started going to therapy regularly. Eleanor Hopkins, the therapist I had seen sporadically during the trial, became a constant in my life. She helped me work through the trauma, the betrayal, the anger. She helped me understand that what had happened to me wasn't my fault, that I had been the victim of sophisticated manipulation by two people who had spent years planning my destruction. She helped me see that I could heal, that I could learn to trust again, even if it would take time. "You're not broken," she told me during one session. "You're wounded, and wounds heal. They leave scars, yes, but they heal. You just have to give yourself time and be patient with yourself." Her words helped, but there were still nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, remembering Rose's face, remembering how close I had come to eating that poisoned soup, remembering that if Joanne hadn't screamed, I would be dead. I made sure Joanne was taken care of. I set up a trust fund for her that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. I gave her a generous bonus for her testimony and her courage, and I told her that she could continue working for me for as long as she wanted, or she could retire and live off the trust fund. She chose to stay, saying that the house felt like home and that she wanted to make sure I was all right. Her loyalty meant more to me than I could express. We developed a closer relationship after the trial. She wasn't just my employee anymore. She was a friend, someone who understood what I had been through, because she had been through it too. We would have dinner together sometimes, sitting at the kitchen table and talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her children, her grandchildren, her life before she came to work for me, and I told her about my childhood, about the pain of being unwanted, about how Gilbert had saved me. "Do you think Gilbert knew?" she asked me one evening. "About Harvey, I mean. Do you think he knew what he had created by abandoning his son?" I had thought about that question a lot. "I think he knew," I said. "I think he made a choice to focus on his business and his success, and he knew that choice meant abandoning Harvey. But I don't think he understood the consequences. I don't think he realized that his rejection would create someone so filled with rage that they would spend decades planning revenge. We talked about forgiveness, about whether it was possible to forgive Gilbert for his role in all of this. I struggled with that question. Gilbert had saved my life, had given me everything I had, but his selfishness, his rejection of his own son, had nearly gotten me killed. Could I forgive him for that? Should I even try? "I think forgiveness is more for you than for him," Joanne said gently. "Gilbert is gone. He can't be hurt by your anger or helped by your forgiveness. but you can be helped by letting go of the anger. You can be helped by accepting that he was human, that he made mistakes, and that those mistakes had terrible consequences. I started going through Gilbert's papers, looking for any mention of Virginia or Harvey. I found a few things tucked away in old files, a letter from Virginia telling him she was pregnant, a copy of the $5,000 check he had sent her, a cease and desist letter his lawyers had sent to Harvey when he was 18. Gilbert had kept these documents, hidden away in a locked drawer in his study. Why? Did he feel guilty? Did he think about the son he had abandoned? Or did he just want proof that he had dealt with the problem if it ever came back to haunt him? I also found a letter Gilbert had written, but never sent. It was addressed to Harvey, dated just a few months before Gilbert passed away. In it, Gilbert wrote about his regrets, about the choices he had made when he was young and ambitious. He wrote that he wished he had been a better man, that he wished he had acknowledged Harvey, that he was sorry for the pain he had caused. But he never sent the letter. He kept it in his drawer, a confession that nobody would ever see. Until now, reading that letter broke something open inside me. Gilbert had known what he had done. He had felt guilty about it, but he had been too proud, too afraid, or too ashamed to make it right. And that choice had consequences that rippled down through the years, destroying lives, creating monsters, nearly killing me. I wanted to be angry at him. Part of me was angry, but another part of me understood. Gilbert had been human, flawed, capable of both great kindness and great cruelty, just like everyone else. I decided to try to find out more about Virginia Foster, Harvey's mother. Through some research and hiring a private investigator, I learned that she had been a kind woman, well-liked in her community despite her poverty. She had worked as a waitress, a housekeeper. Whatever she could find to support herself and Harvey. She had been diagnosed with cancer when Harvey was 17, but she couldn't afford treatment. She had died slowly, painfully, while Harvey watched helplessly. No wonder he was filled with rage. No wonder he blamed Gilbert for everything. I thought about reaching out to Harvey in prison, about trying to talk to him, to understand him better, but Eleanor advised against it. "He tried to have you killed," she reminded me. "You don't owe him anything. Understanding why he did it doesn't mean you have to forgive him or develop a relationship with him. You can understand his pain and still protect yourself from him." She was right, but part of me still wondered. If I had reached out to Harvey after Gilbert died, if I had acknowledged him as Gilbert's son and given him part of the inheritance, would any of this have happened? Could I have prevented it? But I knew that was magical thinking. Harvey didn't just want money, he wanted revenge. He wanted to destroy me the way he felt his life had been destroyed. And Rose didn't just want money either. She wanted power, control, the thrill of the con. No amount of generosity on my part would have changed who they were or what they chose to do. They had made their choices, and those choices had led them to prison. 1 year after the trial, I was sitting in my office at home, looking out at the ocean. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was quiet. Joanne had gone to visit her family for the weekend, and I was alone. I had gotten used to the solitude over the past year, had even come to appreciate it in some ways. I didn't have to perform for anyone, didn't have to pretend to be okay when I wasn't. I could just be myself, whatever that meant now. I thought about where I was a year ago, sitting in a courtroom listening to the verdict. I thought about how much had changed, how much I had changed. I was harder now, more guarded, less willing to trust. But I was also more aware, more careful, more appreciative of the people who had proven themselves loyal. I had learned that betrayal could come from anywhere, from anyone, even from the people you love most. But I had also learned that courage could come from unexpected places, that a maid who barely knew me had risked everything to save my life. I pulled out the toxicology report from my desk drawer. I had kept it, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe as a reminder of how close I had come to death, maybe as proof that the nightmare had been real. I looked at the technical language, the chemical formulas, the conclusion that the soup had contained enough poison to kill me within weeks, and I thought about Joanne's scream, about how one moment of courage had changed everything. I started thinking about legacy, about what I would leave behind when I was gone. Gilbert had left me his fortune, but he had also left me the consequences of his choices. Harvey was his legacy too, a testament to what happens when you put ambition before humanity, when you reject your own child in pursuit of success. I didn't want that to be my legacy. I didn't want to be remembered as a man who had wealth but nothing else. I wanted to be remembered as someone who had helped people, who had made a difference, who had used his second chance at life to do something meaningful. I established a foundation in Gilbert's name, but with a specific mission. It would help children who had been abandoned or orphaned, providing them with education, mentorship, and support. It would make sure that kids like Harvey didn't grow up in poverty and bitterness. It would give them the opportunities that Harvey never had. Maybe it wouldn't change what had happened, but it might prevent future tragedies. It might break the cycle of abandonment and rage. I also established a scholarship in Virginia Foster's name for single mothers who were trying to better their lives while raising children alone. It felt like a small way to honor the woman who had done her best in impossible circumstances, who had loved her son even when his father wouldn't acknowledge him. I couldn't bring her back or undo the pain she had suffered, but I could help other women in similar situations. These acts of charity didn't erase what had happened. They didn't make the betrayal hurt less or make me trust more easily, but they gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. I was using my wealth, the wealth that Gilbert had left me and that Harvey had tried to steal, to do something good, something that would outlast all of us. I started dating again, cautiously, after about 18 months. A colleague introduced me to a woman named Pauline, a professor at a local university who had no interest in my money and didn't even know who I was when we first met. We went slowly, taking time to get to know each other, and I was honest with her from the beginning about what had happened with Rose. She didn't run away. She listened, understood, and gave me the space I needed to heal. I can't promise I'll ever fully trust again, I told her, after we had been seeing each other for a few months. What happened with Rose changed me. I'm more suspicious now, more guarded. That might not ever go away. Pauline took my hand and squeezed it gently. I'm not asking you to be who you were before, she said. I'm getting to know who you are now, and that person is pretty amazing, even with the scars. Maybe because of the scars. Her acceptance meant more to me than I could express. She didn't expect me to be perfect or completely healed. She accepted me as I was, damaged, but trying to move forward. We took things slowly, building trust gradually, and I found myself starting to believe that maybe I could have a real relationship again. Maybe I could let someone in without constantly looking for signs of betrayal. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Rose. She had written to me from prison, asking if I would visit her. She said she had things she wanted to tell me, things she hadn't been able to say in court. I showed the letter to Eleanor, my therapist, and we talked about whether I should go. Part of me wanted closure, wanted to hear what Rose had to say, but another part of me knew that nothing she could say would change what had happened. You don't owe her anything, Eleanor said. Not your time. Not your attention, not your forgiveness. If you visit her, it should be because you want to, because you think it will help you, not because you feel obligated or because you think she deserves it. I thought about it for a week before deciding. I wouldn't visit her. Whatever Rose wanted to say, whatever apologies or explanations she had prepared, I didn't need to hear them. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to, and going back to that place would only pull me backward. I wrote her a letter instead. I told her that I forgave her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I didn't want to carry the anger anymore. I told her that I hoped she would find some peace in prison, some way to come to terms with what she had done, and I told her that I never wanted to hear from her again. I mailed the letter and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was letting go, finally, of the woman who had tried to destroy me. Harvey never reached out to me, and I never reached out to him. As far as I was concerned, we had nothing to say to each other. He was in prison, and he would stay there for a very long time. Maybe he would find redemption. Maybe he would spend the rest of his life bitter and angry. Either way, it was no longer my concern. I had to focus on my own healing, my own life, my own future. 3 years after that night when Joanne screamed and saved my life, I found myself back in the glass mansion, sitting in the living room overlooking the ocean. The house had new memories now, better memories. Pauline and I had gotten married in a small ceremony with just a few close friends. Joanne had been there, beaming with pride like a mother watching her son get married. We had started to build a real life together, one based on honesty and trust that had been earned slowly over time. I still had the toxicology report in my desk drawer. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it, reminding myself of how close I had come to losing everything. But instead of filling me with fear or anger, it filled me with gratitude. Gratitude for Joanne's courage. Gratitude for the second chance I had been given. Gratitude for the life I was building now, scarred but real. I thought about the question that had haunted me since the beginning of all this. If you discover your spouse planned your death with another man, a man whose father once saved your life, would you forgive? Or would you believe some betrayals are too deep to ever heal? I didn't have a simple answer. I had forgiven Rose in a way, but that didn't mean I could forget what she had done. I had forgiven Gilbert for his role in creating Harvey's rage, but that didn't erase the consequences of his choices. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing not to let the past control your future. Some betrayals are too deep to heal completely. The scars remain, the caution remains, the awareness that people are capable of terrible things remains. But you can heal enough to move forward. You can learn to trust again, carefully, slowly, with your eyes open. You can find happiness again, even if it's different from the happiness you had before. You can build a new life on the ruins of the old one. As I sat there watching the sunset, Pauline came and sat beside me. She didn't ask what I was thinking about. She just took my hand and sat with me in comfortable silence, and I realized that this was enough. This quiet moment, this simple connection, this honest relationship built on truth instead of lies. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. I thought about Joanne, who was probably in her quarters preparing dinner, who had become family to me in ways that blood could never determine. I thought about the foundation that was helping kids who had been abandoned, giving them the chances that Harvey never had. I thought about the scholarship helping single mothers like Virginia Foster, and I thought about how one moment of evil had been countered by one moment of courage, and how that balance had made all the difference. The maid had screamed, and in that scream, she had saved 2 lives and exposed a conspiracy 20 years in the making. She had proven that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have the courage to act, and she had taught me that trust, real trust, isn't given blindly. It's earned through actions, through choices, through the willingness to do what's right even when it's hard. I still wonder sometimes what would have happened if things had gone differently, if Rose had succeeded, if Harvey had gotten away with it, if Gilbert had acknowledged his son all those years ago. But I've learned that wondering about what-ifs doesn't change what is. The past is fixed, unchangeable, a series of choices and consequences that led to this moment. All I can do is choose how to move forward from here. So I choose to move forward with gratitude. Gratitude for the people who love me honestly. Gratitude for the second chance I was given. Gratitude for the lessons learned, even though they came at such a high cost. And I choose to move forward with purpose, using my wealth and my influence to help others, to prevent the kind of abandonment and betrayal that nearly destroyed me. The toxicology report sits in my drawer, a reminder of the night that changed everything. But it's not the only reminder. There's Joanne's presence in my life, a constant testament to courage and loyalty. There's the foundation and the scholarship, tangible proof that pain can be transformed into purpose. And there's my relationship with Pauline, evidence that trust can be rebuilt, that love can be found again, that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. As the sun disappeared below the horizon and the sky darkened, I thought about the question I would leave with anyone who heard my story. If you discovered that your spouse had planned your death with another man, a man whose father once saved your life, would you forgive? Would you believe some betrayals are too deep to ever heal? Or would you find a way to move forward, to build something new from the wreckage of what was destroyed? I don't know what you would do. I don't know what anyone would do until they're faced with that choice. All I know is what I did. I chose to survive. I chose to heal, imperfectly and incompletely, but to heal nonetheless. I chose to let go of the anger that would have consumed me. I chose to build a life that honors the second chance I was given, and I chose to tell my story, hoping that it might help someone else who has been betrayed, who has been broken, who wonders if they can ever trust again. The answer is yes, you can. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. You'll have scars that never fully fade. But you can build something new, something real, something worth having. You just have to have the courage to try. So I ask you, what would you have done? Would you have done what I did, choosing forgiveness and moving forward? Or would you have done something different? I want you to take a moment and comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you would have done in this situation. Would you forgive, or would you let the anger consume you? Would you rebuild, or would you let the betrayal define the rest of your life? And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, I want you to do something for. I want you to subscribe to Pressify Stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been through betrayal and needs to know that healing is possible. We have over 100 stories on this channel, stories of every genre, stories that will make you cry, make you laugh, make you think about your own life. Stories about love and loss, betrayal and redemption, pain and healing. Every story is different, but they all share one thing in common. They're about real human experiences, about the struggles we all face, about the choices we make when life pushes us to our limits. So subscribe to Pressify Stories, like this video, share it, comment your thoughts, and check out our other videos. I promise you'll find stories that speak to you, that move you, that remind you that you're not alone in whatever you're going through. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, no matter what betrayal you've faced, no matter how deep the pain, you can heal. You can move forward. You can build something new. You just have to have the courage to try. We'll see you in another story. Thanks for watching.